Putin announced this week that Russia will begin using the Chinese yuan for international payments instead of the dollar. Saudi Arabia is also in talks with Beijing to do the same thing. Speaking of Saudi Arabia, meanwhile, they're in talks with Iran as well to consider an economic alliance with China and Russia. And they can even be joining the BRIC countries, which is an acronym for these countries here, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. These countries all have emerging economies. So what happens if our economy and the U.S. dollar are no longer the world's dominant currency?
This is my first video update from Athens, Greece on this Monday morning. Let's talk about some news. I got my coffee and I'm ready to discuss an EU-US freakout. They are freaking out. The EU is freaking out over the announcement of the deployment of nuclear weapons to Belarus, and the US, they're freaking out over the Xi-Putin meeting where Putin announced that Russia will be trading in Chinese yuan. So we have a double freakout from the collective West. Let's start with the European Union. And they're very, very worried about the deployment of tactical nuclear weapons to Belarus. But they're not worried about the actual nuclear weapons. That's not the point to all of this, because Russia has nuclear weapons all around Russia. They have them in Kaliningrad. So what's the big deal if they deploy nuclear weapons into Belarus? And of course, the U.S., well, they've deployed, from what I understand, they've deployed nuclear weapons in Poland and in Romania. So the nuclear weapons, they're pointing at each other, and whether they're in Kaliningrad or whether they're in Belarus, I don't think that's what's angering the European Union or scaring them or freaking them out. You know what's freaking them out? What's angering them? They won't be able to get regime change now in Belarus. That is what this is all about. A couple of days before Putin announced the deployment of tactical nukes to Belarus, we had Anthony Blinken at a congressional hearing saying that the U.S. has appointed a Belarus special envoy to travel between Washington and Lithuania, where this Guaido-like government in quote-unquote exile is hanging out at, led by Svetlana Guaido-Tikhanovskaya. And this envoy's job was to see the day-to-day coordination of what's going on in D.C. and what's happening with this Guaido government in exile, and coordinate the process of regime change in Belarus to give it one more try to overthrow the Lukashenko government. And when Anthony Blinken talked about the appointment of a special envoy, Svetlana Guaido-Tikhanovskaya was actually in D.C. She was meeting with Wendy Sherman, the Deputy Secretary of State, and she was going around the various mainstream media TV shows, and she was talking about Belarus's freedom and democracy and human rights, and how Lukashenko has to go and she has to become president, and Belarus's EU path, and Belarus belongs in the European Union because Belarus is all about, or at least her government would be all about, democracy and human rights and EU values, and all of the nonsense that we saw play out with Juan Guaido in Venezuela. Copy paste the same thing. And so this was just last week, and I reported on this. And 2 days ago, we have Putin giving an interview to Russian media and saying, yeah, well, we're going to deploy nuclear weapons in Belarus. checkmate. No regime change for you. No regime change for you. No soup for you. That is basically what Putin announced. That's the move that he made. And from the minute that Russia deploys nuclear weapons in Belarus, it means that Belarus is going to be protected by Russia, no matter what. No matter what. And you take the biggest. What do I want to say? The biggest card off the table when you deploy nukes to Belarus, and that is the military card, because when you're going to go for regime change or a coup d'état, one of the first institutions that you have to move to your side, that you have to get on your side for a regime change, is the military. It's absolutely important to make sure that you get the military on your side to go ahead with the regime change, or the military actually has to be the institution that's starting the regime change for you. But the military absolutely has to be on side if you're going to overthrow a government. And so if you're going to overthrow Lukashenko, if you're Svetlana Guaido-Tikhanovskaya, and you're going to overthrow Lukashenko, well, you got to make sure that you get your hooks into the Belarusian military. You have to get them on your side. You have to corrupt them. You have to get them to turn against Lukashenko, and then you're well on your way to getting a successful regime change. And Putin has just taken that card off the table, because Russian nuclear weapons in Belarus means that the Russian military and the Belarusian military are like simpatico. They are connected now. They were already pretty connected, but now it's game over. It is game over. Any whiff of a protest, of a pro-EU protest like what we saw in Georgia, or any type of palace intrigue in Belarus, and the Russians are just going to stamp it out. So that is why the EU is absolutely furious, because regime change has been effectively stamped out. It's been squashed by the announcement that Russia is going to deploy tactical nuclear weapons to Belarus. Do you think the U.S. would allow any type of unfriendly government or regime change? Not even regime change. Do you think the U.S. would allow an unfriendly government in Poland or in Romania now that they have nuclear weapons deployed in those countries? No chance. No way would the U.S. ever let that happen. So it doesn't matter what government is in power in Romania or in Poland, it is going to be a pro-U.S. government, because they've got those American nukes deployed there. And so the same thing holds for Belarus now. And the EU is so mad because they've invested so much time and money in Svetlana Guaido-Tikhanovskaya. They had a failed coup in 2020, 2021. I always forget the date of the attempted coup in Belarus. They had that failed coup, and now they've been investing a lot in this government in exile in Lithuania and Poland. And they finally got the U.S. to really invest in this government in exile as well. And they had a special envoy who was going to coordinate the next regime change in Belarus. And they were all excited, the EU and the US, but the EU was really excited. We're going to finally get another crack at regime change in Belarus. We've got Blinken on our side now. We're going to give it one more shot. And Svetlana Guaido-Tikhanovskaya, she's going to be president of Belarus. And along comes Putin, and he says, yeah, well, I'm just going to deploy nukes there. So, take your little regime change idea and run along. That is basically what happened. So Jungle Joseph Borrell, He tweeted this. He said, Belarus hosting Russian nuclear weapons would mean an irresponsible escalation and threat to European security. Belarus can still stop it. It is their choice. The EU stands ready to respond with further sanctions. Sanctions. That's their answer for everything. That is the EU's answer for everything now, is sanctions. Russia's going to deploy nuclear weapons to Belarus. Sanctions. Kazakhstan is going to export washing machines to Russia. Sanctions. Let's see. South Africa is hosting the Russian Bolshoi Ballet. Sanctions. Mexico City is hosting a conference on Tolstoy. Sanctions. Sanctions, sanctions, sanctions. It's their answer for everything now. Sanctions. Oh, man. What are you going to sanction, Jungle Joseph? There's nothing left to sanction anymore. Okay, there's... What can they sanction for Russia? Now, uranium. They should sanction uranium. But France... Who else? France and Hungary and a whole bunch of EU countries are going to be like... No way. So I'm trying to think what else they could possibly sanction at this point. That's the only thing that comes to mind. Maybe there's one or two other things, but whatever they've tried to sanction beyond what they've passed in the 10 sanctions packages is a no-go for various reasons. Various EU countries still depend on whatever's left to not sanction. They depend on it from Russia, like uranium. So, you know. Jungle Joseph threatening Russia and Belarus with sanctions. Oh, man, it's pathetic. So we have the U.S. Freak out, and they're freaking out over the realization that the USD is not going to be the reserve currency in the short to medium term, most likely the medium term. And this is freaking a lot of people out now in the U.S. government. I've actually got a statement from Marjorie Taylor Greene, who represents, I believe she represents Georgia. And this is what she said with the announcement from Putin the other day that Russia is not going to be using US dollars, but they're going to be using Chinese yuan. And of course, I said in my video yesterday that Putin himself, during the interview with Russian TV the other day, he said, it's not that we don't want to use dollars, it's that the US doesn't let us use dollars. So, you know, self-inflicted. But this is what Marjorie Taylor Greene said. Quote, I warned that the dollar would be replaced by the yuan a year ago, when Washington decided to start a proxy war with Russia in Ukraine. And now it's happening. That's what she tweeted out. Yes, it is. Now it is happening because you left Russia no choice. You use the sanctions as a weapon and you use the US dollar as a weapon. Well, naturally, countries are going to get freaked out. And they're going to say, you know what, we can't be holding all these dollars and we can't be trading in these dollars because today they're going after Russia, but tomorrow they're going to come after us and they're going to blame us for violating their values and international order, whatever that even means. And so you see it with Saudi Arabia. You saw it with Indonesia a week ago, where they said they're going to move away from Visa and MasterCard, and they're going to start building an alternative. You see it all over the global south. A lot of countries in Africa. I was watching a speech the other day, and I forgot which African leader was giving the speech, and he said it's time to turn in your dollars, move away from the USD, because the entire world is diversifying away from the US dollar. I forgot which leader it was, and I was watching the video the other day. Anyway, I'm sure in the comments down below, someone will put the link to that speech. But yeah, the The whole world is saying, you're going after Russia, you're going after their frozen assets, you're going after their reserves, you're seizing yachts, you're seizing property. It's going to be us the next year. So yeah, they're moving away from the USD, and it's starting to freak a lot of people in the U.S. government out. And we've been saying this on the Duran for a while now, that this is exactly what is going to happen. And the way they're coping, the way the collective West is coping with all of this, the media, is that they're trying to paint this picture that Russia is now being controlled by China. This is the narrative that they're running with, that Russia is being controlled by China. Look at this cover from The Economist. The world according to Xi, and all of those countries, Iran, Russia, they all revolve around the Chinese sun. It's called coping. It is called coping. 1945, they posted an article with the title, "China's New Mideast Order is Anti-American. Thanks to Joe Biden's horrific leadership, America is about to lose the Middle East and will soon see China and Russia capturing it." Yep, the same holds true for Africa and South America and parts of Asia. This could have all been avoided. The sanctions did nothing to help Ukraine in the war. They did nothing to stop Putin's war machine. They did nothing to bring peace. They did nothing to turn the Russian public against Putin and get a regime change. The sanctions didn't do any of those things. A 100% failure. And in the real world, outside of Brussels headquarters and the halls of Congress and the White House, all the people that put the sanctions together would all be fired. Every single one of them, including the top executive, the top executive in the US and the top executive in Brussels. They would all be fired. All of them. But that's not going to happen. They're going to all be promoted, is what's going to happen. So you have this freak out over the announcement from Putin that Russia is going to be trading in yuan. And even Putin, during his interview the other day, he said this as the collective West copes with this de-dollarization and this new alliance, though we don't want to call it an alliance, between Russia and China. He said that the people that are upset with this alliance are envious. He said they are envious. Quote, "Let them think about themselves." He said the same EU countries also depend on China many times more than our country. Facts. Facts from the Russian president. There is a whole bunch of collective West countries that depend a whole lot more on China than Russia depends on China. And the collective West countries really have nothing to offer China. Russia actually has stuff to offer China. That's why this alliance, though we won't call it an alliance, that's why this alliance is beneficial for both parties. That's why they see each other as partners and not as one on top of the other. Because Russia has what China needs, China has what Russia needs. It's a perfect fit. You can't say that for the economies of the collective West. They need China, but China doesn't really need them. They don't really have anything to offer China. And Putin also said that for decades, there were many who wanted to set the Russian Federation and the USSR against China and vice versa. We understand the world we live in and value our relations with China. Yeah. Putin and Xi Jinping, they understand that the collective West would like nothing more than to drive a wedge between China and Russia like they did during the Cold War. But this time around, it's not working, and it's not going to work. So that's the freak out with the announcement from Putin that Russia is going to be trading in Chinese currency. Mikhail Podolyak, who is the chief of staff or the spokesman for the Zelensky regime, whatever his title is, he said this with regards to the deployment of nuclear weapons to Belarus. Putin, the Russian Federation, is too predictable. Making a statement about tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus, he admits that he is afraid of losing and all he can do is scare with tactics. Second, he once again states his involvement in the crime, violating nuclear non-proliferation treaty. It's called coping. It is called coping from Podolyak, who was in his previous employment, I think he was like the production assistant for Zelensky Kolomoisky's TV channel, TV show. What was it called? Kvartal 25 or something like that. All these guys were working as production assistants and script writers and directors and technicians for the channel, and then they all became part of the Zelensky government. From producing a TV show to waging a proxy war against Russia. Yeah, it's not going to turn out well for the Zelensky regime. So we have a whole bunch of protests taking place at this very moment. We had protests in Pakistan, very, very large protests. People poured onto the streets, angered at the announcement that Imran Khan was going to be charged with corruption and terrorism. Imran Khan, the former Prime Minister of Pakistan, who was overthrown in a successful coup. He denies all the charges against him, but it looks like they're going to make a move to now lock up Imran Khan so he doesn't pose a threat to the current Pakistan regime. And so you had hundreds of thousands of people pour out onto the streets to support Imran Khan. Of course, you have the protests in France, and over the weekend, 1 million people, I don't know, maybe 3 million people throughout France. In Paris, I heard something like 600,000 people just in one main city center in Paris were protesting the pension reforms. And I think it goes a lot deeper than Macron's pension reforms. But Macron, he is going to, or at least he has stated that he is going to stay the course. And we're going to see how long this lasts, because on a daily basis now, Paris is on fire and there are protests every single day. And these aren't small protests. This is pretty much all of French society saying that they will not go along with Macron's pension reform. And actually, going back to Putin's interview that he gave the other day, he was asked about the protests in Paris, in France. And you want to know what Putin said? And I'm paraphrasing, but this is how Putin replied. He said that Russia went through their pension reforms. They got it through the parliament, through the Duma. Everything was approved. It was tough. He took a hit to his popularity, which he did take a hit to his popularity. People were unhappy, but they did the necessary things that needed to be done with regards to pensions. And Putin said what's going on in France is their problem. He said that's a domestic issue that the French government needs to handle. He didn't come out and say, I condemn Macron and I call for the Macron government to step down and international values and order and law and all of these things. He didn't say any of that stuff. At least from what I read from the excerpt of the interview, he was like, "This is a domestic issue for France. We did what we needed to do as Russia. They need to handle this." I wouldn't worry, citizens of France. This problem can easily be solved. All that is needed is for Macron to send another 20 or 30 billion to Ukraine, and it'll solve all these problems. That's all you need to do is just send money to Ukraine, or maybe Macron can sanction somebody. Sanctions seems to be the go-to route for EU officials in dealing with whatever problems they have. Just sanction somebody. Macron, just sanction someone. Forget about the protests. Just place some sanctions on someone. Look busy. Pretend that you're busy. Pretend that you're sanctioning Russia or you're fighting a war against Russia. Just look busy doing this stuff, and maybe all that other stuff will just go away. So that's what Putin said with the protests in France. But every day you have protests, and the video footage, the photos. I mean, these are huge protests. The Zelensky curse is hitting Macron really, really hard. And you also had yesterday very, very big protests happening in Israel. Thousands and thousands of people poured onto the streets yesterday on the news that the defense minister, Gallant, was fired by Netanyahu or he resigned. To be quite honest, I am not sure what the story is here. I have seen media sources say that the defense minister resigned. I've seen media sources say that Netanyahu fired the defense minister. I'm not sure which one it is, but these protests have been going on in Israel for a while now, but yesterday they really picked up. And people poured onto the streets, very upset with the announcement of the firing of the defense minister, or the resignation of the defense minister. All of this is due to these judicial reforms that Netanyahu is trying to pass. And this is dividing the country. This is dividing Israel, and even the U.S. is starting to be very concerned with what is going on in Israel. From what I understand, there are going to be strikes throughout the country. People are going to refuse to go to work, and it's not looking good for Netanyahu. Former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett said Israel is in its greatest danger since the Yom Kippur War. Universities in Israel are going to stop classes indefinitely from today. Senior Likud officials say Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu has lost control of the situation. U.S. National Security Council issued a statement. We are very concerned about the events in Israel and their possible impact on the combat readiness of the Israeli army. So protests in Pakistan, protests in France, protests in Israel. Incredible stuff happening. Incredible stuff. And on the 29th of March, the Zelensky regime is going to be kicking out the monks at the Kiev-Pechesk monastery. That is going to be happening in a couple of days. And they held what might be their last service this Sunday. The crowds were so huge, were so big that you couldn't even fit them into the church and into the monastery. And if the Zelensky regime does do this, I predict that the Zelensky regime is finished. That's all I'm going to say about this. Maybe the Zelensky regime will think twice before they kick out the monks and the real Orthodox Church in Ukraine, not the fake Orthodox Church, not the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, which is the heretical church. The Ukraine Orthodox Church is the real Orthodox Church in Ukraine, and they've created this fake. The U.S. State Department, the CIA, they've created this fake Orthodox Church, which is a heretical church, and we'll see if Zelensky goes through with removing the monks and confiscating the property, because for Zelensky, he sees all of the property and the possessions of the church, and he wants to get his hands on that property. So let's now talk about a CNN article real quick before we get to our clown world, which says that the strategic goal of the Ukraine counteroffensive this spring is to cut off the land corridor to Crimea. That is what CNN is reporting. They say that this will deliver a decisive blow to the Russian military in the south, towards Melitopol, and to the regions of Kherson and other regions that are around Crimea, that are adjacent to Crimea. And then the question is whether Ukrainian troops will try to enter Crimea. That is the big question. The U.S. is skeptical. They're doubtful about Ukraine invading Crimea. Ukraine is saying that they're going to do it. And CNN is reporting from their Ukraine sources that Russia is fortifying Crimea, and they're taking the threats very seriously, as they should, as any responsible government should. And they're building a lot of fortifications, and they're preparing for the Ukraine invasion into Crimea. Quite an incredible narrative when you think about it. The return of Crimea may seem like an unlikely aspiration for Ukraine, but it is making significant efforts to make the Russian occupation as uncomfortable as possible, and the Russians are going to great lengths to strengthen the peninsula, according to CNN. A senior official in charge of Crimea for Ukraine, a Ukrainian senior official in charge of Crimea, said on Friday that fortifications are being built on the coast and near the border with mainland Ukraine, but also deep in Crimea. The Defense Ministry spokesperson, she was speaking to reporters the other day, and they were asking her about this spring counteroffensive into the east and then down south towards Melitopol, and then eventually invading Crimea. And they were asking questions about the big spring counteroffensive, and the spokesperson was like, look, don't ask us about the counteroffensive. This is top secret stuff. I'm paraphrasing what she said, but she's like, this is top secret stuff. The only people that know about the spring counteroffensive is President Zelensky, Zaluzhny, Sirsky, and just top high-level officials. No one else knows about our plans for the spring offensive. No one else knows except the entire world. The entire world, except CNN, which is talking about it, citing senior Ukrainian officials as they talk about the spring counteroffensive. We're either going to get a spring counteroffensive, whatever that's going to be, successful, not successful, who knows, but we're either going to get a spring counteroffensive with Ukraine military, with NATO military, with an army of 300,000 from Poland and Romania and whatever. We're either going to get that, or this has been one big bluff. One big bluff. Misdirection. Who knows? Zelensky said in an interview with a Japanese publication, he said that Ukraine needs more weapons in order to start their spring offensive. Is that how it works? I mean, it's springtime. It's springtime. So if this offensive is going to happen in a month or two, but is that how it works? You get the weapons and then you can start the offensive next day? Is this like, G.I. Joe military planning? This is cinema planning, as we said in a Duran video the other day. This is how it's done in the movies, right? Zelensky's like, once we get fighter jets, then next day we can start our spring offensive. I didn't know it was that simple. Let's do a clown world and wrap this video up. And in this clown world, we return to China and Joe Biden. And according to Reuters, they are saying that the government in China, Xi Jinping, they refuse to set up a phone call with Joe Bidenopoulos, Greece's favorite son. Biden is so desperate to talk to Xi Jinping. I mean, he is desperate to talk to Xi Jinping, as is Zelensky, but Xi Jinping is not picking up the phone. Please call me, Xi Jinping, please, please. Please call me. Maybe call me, Xi Jinping, maybe. Joe Bidenopoulos is sitting in the White House, the phone right next to him. Is he going to call? Is Xi Jinping going to call? Anthony Blinken, is Xi Jinping going to call? Did he call me yet? So sad. So sad for Joe Bidenopoulos. So Xi Jinping is snubbing Bidenopoulos. He is snubbing Zelensky. And he travels to Moscow and meets with Putin and says, big changes are coming, the likes of which we have not seen for 100 years. And everyone is freaking out. All right, that's the video for this Monday morning, theduran.locals.com. We are on Rumble and Rockfin and Odyssey, BitChute, Telegram, and go to the Duran shop. 10% off. Use the code. Good day. Take care.